Welcome to today's lunchtime lesson, and today guys we're continuing this little focus on conditionals that we started a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to be doing a few in this block, and we're going to be talking today about how we're going to use the second conditional. Yeah, so just to remind you, we talked about this when we talked about the first conditional, but just to refresh your memories, and we're using conditionals, guys, in English. When we use them, we tend to get obsessed. I find anyway that students usually get like fairly obsessed and focused on the construction of a conditional and how it should be put together, and we forget to think about why we use a conditional, okay? The purpose of it or the pragmatics of it. So remember, if we don't consider these pragmatics of why we're using these structures like conditionals, then ultimately you're never going to be able to correctly apply those structures, and that's going to have that knock-on effect that you're just not going to be using natural language. Yeah, so as we said, 4 different kinds of conditionals. Each of these have a different function. Some of them are also more commonly used than other ones, and very often conditionals, when they're used in like real authentic language, when we produce them authentically, they actually look quite different to these common structures that you get taught in your grammar books. Okay, so it's really important that we think a little bit out of the box here. Yep. So today, sorry, I said the first conditional. Today we're focusing on the second conditional. We talked about the first conditional already. So what's the purpose of the second conditional, guys? Yep. Remember, when we have a conditional, it always has to have conditions. So you'll always have 2 aspects when we're doing a condition. So you will have a situation and you'll have a consequence to that situation. So for example, if we're using the second conditional, I use this to talk about hypothetical situations now or in the future. So I would use the second conditional structure to discuss a hypothetical situation and the hypothetical consequence of that situation. For example, winning the lottery would be a hypothetical situation, right? And buying a mansion would be a hypothetical consequence of this situation, at least for me, okay? Because I definitely don't think I'll be winning the lottery. So again, revising and just going over this again, our situation is expressed using the if clause. However, we don't always use an if clause. Okay, the word if in the clause, right? We sometimes use other structures like we'll see today. And the consequence is what we can call the auxiliary clause. Normally, we'll see that described as would, but that can, remember, also vary a lot. And there's lots of different things that we can use to structure that. Commonly, the ones that you'll see in your grammar books, if we're talking about the second conditional, will look like that, right? If with the past simple, would with infinitive. If I won the lottery, I'd buy a mansion. Yeah, that's what your classic second conditional would look like. But the same as with the first conditional, there's actually lots of different ways we can express this hypothetical situation now or in the future. Here are some examples. If she was more responsible, she might progress faster. If I was running a marathon, I'd probably be exhausted. I could do more work if I had more time. If we were running, we would definitely catch the bus. Okay, so just have a look at those examples. Tell me what you notice about those sentences and think about what structures we're using here. Okay, how are they different from that classic if with past simple and would with infinitive structure that we saw before? Yeah, just take a little minute to look at the examples. Okay, so if we look at these in more detail, we'll see that here, I'm not using would, I'm using might as a modal of speculation. We'll see that here I'm not using past simple, I'm actually using past continuous to talk about an action that was in progress at a point in time in the past. And here I've added in this adverb to add an aspect of speculation as well. Here, instead of would, I've used could because I want to focus here on ability, on possibility. Again, here, we've used the past continuous. And here, we've added in another of these adverbs of speculation, definitely, to give that aspect, okay? So it's quite different to that classic structure that we talked about before, okay? So we could summarize it like this, right? If I'm constructing a second conditional, I can use if with the past simple or the past continuous, yeah? And my consequence clause might be with would, but it could also use might or could with an infinitive. I could also bring in words like probably and definitely to add more speculation to the sentence that I'm using. Right, now here's some other examples of second conditional sentences, right? Think about what the word in bold is replacing. So, supposing you lost your job, what would you do? If you happened to see someone steal something in a shop, would you tell someone? There would be a significant improvement in society if the government were to introduce better environmental policies. Before I go home, I might finish this report. Were the company not able to provide the service, customers would receive a refund. Okay. Oops, sorry. I've just realized here, I think I've put a mistake in that one. We'll see in a second. Hang on. All right. So think about what word is being replaced here. Yeah. And hopefully what you'll notice is that in all of these, this word or these structures are replacing or adding to the word if. Yeah. So let's look at those again, but this time we're going to consider the register and the tone that these changes add. So here we go. Supposing you lost your job. Hang on, let me bring them back up again. Actually, all of them. Here we go. There you go. That was the mistake I had before. Imagine you had more time, right? What would you do with it? That was the example I wanted to show you, not the one I put by mistake. All right, so this first one here, supposing. So instead of if, I'm using the word supposing. And we use supposing a lot in more informal English and especially in spoken English. It's something that's going to come up quite a lot. If you happened to see someone steal something in a shop, would you tell someone? So this would be the same as saying if you saw someone, yeah, steal in a shop. But this is something else we use quite often in spoken English, and it's a fairly neutral register, okay? But it is very conversational, yeah? Okay, this next one here, if the government were to introduce better environmental policies. So I'm saying instead of if the government introduced, I say if the government were to introduce. And this is something that we use a lot in formal and written English, and it elevates the register of what you're using. So this is a great thing that you might read, for example, in an essay or in a report. Then the next one here, guys, imagine you had more time. What would you do with it? So imagine, similar to supposing, yeah, it's replacing our if here. It's informal, really common in spoken or informal written English as well. And finally, were the company not to be able to provide service, customers would receive a refund. Okay, sorry, I've seen another mistake here, guys. Sorry, were the company not able to, right? Not be able to. This is what we call an inversion, okay? Were the company not able to provide instead of if the company isn't or wasn't able to provide, yeah? And these inversions, again, are something that we'll see in formal and written English especially, okay? This would be a good example of something you might read in like terms and conditions, yeah? If you were reading a company's terms and conditions, you might see this kind of structure. So we've got lots of different ways here to construct our second conditionals, which are much more varied and much richer in language as well. Okay. Now, if I'm using an inversion inversion with the second conditional, if I want to make my sentence much more formal, an easy thing to do is apply these inversions. And if you compare what we're doing here, yeah, all we are doing is we are taking away if, yeah, and instead of this past simple here, I'm using the infinitive. Okay, so we take away if, from if we add in were he, and instead of in the past, we're going to use the infinitive, were he to push the button. Okay, the difference here, guys, is if I've got the verb was here already, that's my main verb, and here I'll have an adjective or a noun. When I do that one, I take away if and I use were, but then I don't need to put this verb in again. Okay, so here I would just go on directly to use the adjective or the noun that we're forming here. Yeah, and inversions are a really easy thing, guys, that you can bring into your writing. Yeah, they're really not that complicated to produce once you get the hang of it, and it's something that's going to have a really big effect on your formal writing. It's going to make it much more elegant. Okay, so when we're thinking about speaking hypothetically in English, a good way, because sometimes my students say, God, I can never remember what the structure is and how I have to change it. So if you just think about speaking hypothetically in English, think about back chaining, right? So what I mean by that is that you're always taking a step backwards. So if I want to speak hypothetically about the present, I'm going to go back one step in time to express that hypothetical situation. So for example, if I win, I'll call you, right? That's a possible or likely situation. If I want to make that hypothetical, I take a step back in time and I change it into past, right? So if I won, I would call you. And now with that step backwards, I've made it hypothetical. And we would continue to do this, right? So this is me speaking hypothetically about the present. If I wanted to speak hypothetically about the past, I'll take one step further more into the past. Yeah. If I had won, I would have called you. And that would be our third conditional, guys. But we're going to be talking about that in a few weeks' time. Okay. But if you just remember that when we're speaking hypothetically, with any kind of other hypothetical structure like imagine, supposing, all these kind of words that we'll use to express a hypothetical situation, go back one step. And remember as well, pronunciation is really important, okay, for your listening as well as for your speaking. So important things we need to consider when we're producing these second conditional sentences. We need to contract the auxiliary would. Okay, so if I have this sentence here, if I won the lottery, I would buy a car. You're never going to hear an L1 speaker of English in a fluent conversation say, I would buy. They're going to contract this, right? And they're going to say, I'd buy a car. Okay. Remember that when we are writing contractions, we only contract on a pronoun, right? So if I have this sentence here, if she won the lottery, Claire would buy a car, I'll never write this contraction because that looks horrible, yeah, in written English. But in spoken English, I'm always going to make that contraction if I'm speaking quickly and fluently, right? So although I won't write the contraction, I'll pronounce it. So I would say Claire would buy a car, right? If she won the lottery, Claire would buy a car, yeah? Now, remember that these kind of contractions, guys, they are important for your speaking because they will make you more fluent. Yeah, they will make you sound a bit more natural in your language. But the main reason that we want to work with contractions like this is to improve your listening skills so that you are aware of them when you're hearing people speaking to you. Okay, that's the most important reason to work with contractions. Another thing that you'll find when producing second conditionals is the would you connection. Okay, so instead of would you in when we're speaking second conditionals, we say would you, right, in the question form. So for example, what would you do if you had more money? What would you do if you had more money? Okay, what would you do? It would look like that. And then remember too that when we are speaking in these kind of quick and fluent ways, we want to think about our blocks of sound. So that means putting your auxiliary with the main verb, right? So it's not what would you do? That's going to be one block of sound. What would you do? Yeah, what would you do? There's a fantastic hip hop video from the early 2000s by a band called City High, and it's called "What Would You Do?" And I'm going to put a link to that video. I'll put it in the comments section here, and also in our classrooms if you're studying with us, and you can watch the video and you'll hear all of these examples of people saying, "What would you do?" Okay, because that's the song. What would you do if your son was at home crying all night on the bedroom floor? I'll stop singing it. You can listen to it in your free time and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, now in terms of how you can use these practically, especially if you're planning to take exams, yeah? Second conditionals are excellent ways for you to illustrate and expand your arguments when you're speaking and when you're writing. Yeah. So, for example, we can use them, especially guys, to create scenarios like this. Okay. So imagine we had more money, it would make a difference. Or if you were to take away these rights, it would have terrible consequences. Okay, they're brilliant ways to illustrate the points that you want to make. And that means that they are really fantastic if you're doing exams for your writing, in particular essays, reports, or proposals. And if you're doing an exam, they're brilliant for part 3, if you're doing IELTS or proficiency, or part 4, if you're doing first certificate or advanced of your speaking exam as well. Because that's the way, remember, you can give these really nice, well-rounded answers. So you're going to give your opinion, you're going to explain that opinion, and then you will illustrate your opinion, and you can use the second conditional to do that. Okay, it's a great way to do it. By using the second conditional, especially by using those other ways that we've looked at today of applying it, like with the inversion, or like with the other expressions like supposing or imagine, or if you happen to, if we're using those different ways, you're also going to increase your language mark in the exam, right? So you're going to get higher marks for your grammar and also for your vocabulary, right? So that's really how we can use these in a really useful way, or a real life way, applying it to our day-to-day.